Welcome everyone coming in. We're just going to give everyone a minute or two to get settled. While we wait, I would love to hear what song you guys cannot stop listening to. I'm going to start with mine. Feel free to jump it into the chat. Mine is We Don't Talk About Bruno from Encanto, and you're welcome for now having it stuck in your head the rest of the day. It might be that that is everyone's answer. It's such a great movie, isn't it? Ooh, I don't know that song. I'm gonna have to Google that one, Ashley.
Highly recommended. And it's like warm like summer where I am right now. So it's a good mood song.
Same. Oh, I'm down for that. Oh, I love some Bruno. Ooh, Jenna, that's a really good like pep song. Good for You by Olivia Rodrigo. Yep, my niece is 5, which is why it's also on repeat in our house every time she comes over. Music for a sushi restaurant? I love me some Harry Styles. Gonna have to check that out. We can export this chat, right? I might make a Spotify playlist that goes along with this webinar. Like this. Ooh, pink. That's a good one. Good throwback. Thanks, Ashley. I got sucked into reading everyone's responses. Another Harry Styles vote. I like this. These are my people. It looks like our participants are starting to slow down a little, so we are going to get started so that we have time for all of our content today. Thank you again all for joining us as we talk about ways to develop your strategic thinking to improve your decision-making company-wide, understanding and interpreting people data to draw actionable insights, and aligning the needs of your people with core business objectives. After our panel discussion, we have Ashley with LifeLabs, who will lead a workshop to help you take action to get your seat at the leadership table. My name is Melissa Clark, and I'm a customer success manager at ChartHop, and we have some brilliant presenters here to give their insight into how they accomplish these tasks in their day-to-day. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves now. Ashley, if you want to get started.
Sure. Hi, folks. I'm Ashley. I'm the director of IDEA, so Inclusion, Diversity, Equity, and Anti-Bias at LifeLabs Learning. I actually am super stoked about this topic because my background is in social work. And so data and strategy were like not something that were a big strength for me when I pivoted into this type of work. And so it's something that I've become really passionate and excited about. So I'm happy to chat with you all today.
I love it. Thanks, Ashley. We're so glad you could join us. Carly.
Hey everyone, my name is Carly. I'm the Director of Total Rewards at Eden Health. So I have a long background, longer than what I care to give up because it'll show my age, in comp and benefits. And so I've been doing this for a long time, kind of before the latest 3 years, which is now unprecedented times for our economy and for the resignations we've been going through and all the things. So being kind of keeping yourself fresh has been like my new motto, and being okay with change. So it's been great to be able to see this like kind of the historical perspective leading into what we're doing now, and can't wait to speak with all of you about all of the questions.
Thank you, Carly, for joining us. And Ivory.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ivory Johnson, and my pronouns are she, her, and I lead all of diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging at ChartHop. I have a long background in focusing on inclusion and diversity, especially on the recruiting side of things. I've worked for companies such as Google, Twitter, and better.com recently before coming to ChartHop. I'm excited to share my perspective because throughout my career, I've always utilized data to be able to tell a story to increase representation at all of these companies. So I'm excited to share some insights and chat with you all today.
Thank you all so much. So I hope you're as excited as I am about the amazing people that we have that are going to expound their insight for you. But we are actually going to first start by asking you guys. I'd love to know how many of you are currently using software or some other tracking systems to capture your HR and people data. And just so you know, there's going to be a poll that pops up on your screen. You guys can answer there. All right, we'll give it like 5 more seconds for people to jump in and vote. And if Kubalay, you want to close that poll for us? Will it show us results? Excellent, thank you. All right, it looks like most of you, yes, are using systems, but they could use improvement. So hopefully you guys will learn some takeaways here that you guys can bring back and kind of reevaluate your systems to improve them. So with that, our presenters, Ashley, Carly, Ivory, what systems do you guys have in place at your current companies that you use to collect people data? Any one of you can start if you love this topic.
I will, first of all, I'm going to empathize for anybody who said that they don't have any systems. I feel like I'm in this moment right now of my life. So we do have systems. We actually utilize ChartHop. We also have engagement surveys through Culture Amp right now, and we have our normal kind of employee census data. So we are utilizing engagement data as like our #1 source to try to figure out what our employees is meaningful to our employees, what's kind of making them tick versus making them feel a little bit grumpy. And that's a very important thing. Also, just kind of word of mouth. I think for those of you who have manual systems and can track this, you will find that there are very easy trends to track and how people's are feeling and sharing through meetings. You just have to kind of get intuitive enough to be able to grab those trends from them. So it's not the end of the world if you don't have those systems yet. I'm going to pass it.
Yeah, I'll chime in here. I remember early on in my career, I was actually doing a lot of data collection manually. So if you don't have any systems, you're probably pulling from many different systems, pulling data together, trying to interpret it, and then understand what it's saying, and then being able to create those stories. And it takes so much time. Right now at ChartHop, we actually utilize ChartHop and keep all of our people data in ChartHop. And through that, we're able to analyze all of our people data. We're able to compare people data, compare like our employees' experience through engagement surveys. We're also able to look at employees' life cycle of like promotions, comp planning, and things like that. And then being able to analyze that data intersectionally, and also look at it and compare it to like race and gender and other demographic data as well. So we're able to put the entire story together in one place. And I am so thankful that I discovered ChartHop, because even prior to that, I was still doing things manually, and it was such a headache. So I totally empathize with anyone that doesn't have any systems.
Yeah, +1 to what both of y'all are sharing. I really love engagement survey data because it's so comprehensive and can help us find trends that maybe we didn't know were there. I feel like often I'm able to intuit what are the trends that are going to show up, but with the right surveys and the right tools, we can find things that we didn't know existed, right? And so not only does data back up what we already know is happening, but it helps us find new trends and new themes and what's going on. If you're only doing engagement surveys though, I know you're experiencing the problem of like, we hired 100 new people between the last engagement survey and now. So how do we know what's actually going on? And so I think what y'all are both talking about is finding a comprehensive way of having continuous ongoing data to be able to tell the story. I'm just going to share one small anecdote of what I found helpful, specifically in my work of doing DEI work. A lot of people talk about numbers in terms of demographics and hiring. I have a lot of feelings about this. I don't believe in setting quotas and trying to like fill a certain number, but I do believe in creating systems that allow for diversity, right? But we can't do that without good data and good tracking. And so that means looking at every stage of the hiring process, from the first pipeline all the way into retention from 6 months to a year later. And if we don't have like baseline data of what we're actually looking for and what is successful, it makes it really hard to know if the systems that you're creating are working. I'm sharing this because it's important to understand, what are you trying to accomplish? Why are you trying to accomplish that? And then being able to look and see if that's working and where you're falling through. This can happen in a lot of different ways, but I think Ivory, like you're mentioning that story, that's so important to understand first what story you need to be able to show, or what story you're actually trying to find out more about.
Thank you, Ashley. As a behavior analyst in my past life, I also have a strong passion for data and understand that context really means everything when you're taking it. So you made that point about without good data, but what happens if you have good data, but you don't have the leadership support to really drive any initiatives? Do you guys have any tips or experience on how to prepare and present this really good data that you've collected with your executive teams? Anyone feel strongly about this one?
I'll get into it. So I've been at Eden Health for less than 90 days, so I feel like it's real fresh for me right now. So what I would say is, like, I know some of this always seems so basic and so simple. Let's start with the relationship. Making the introduction, also finding out like what those leaders do to make them tick. Super important to understand, what is their strategic plan for the company? How do they need for the values to align of our employees to the business? And like, what is our ultimate goal? Like, what does good look like to them, to make sure that like we have the voice of the people through engagement. And also what we forgot early was like exit interviews, although it's too late to get that data source then. And be able to set that foundation based off of business and based off of employee needs and value alignment, to make sure that foundation is set. Because once you have that set, then everything else becomes easier. So you have this data story, which is beautiful to kind of lay on top, but you could say, hey, remember, we agreed to this. We said that it did align to your business need. It did align to your values. It did align to this. So we're going to like stick with this, and we're really going to own it. And I need for you to be a champion for me and for these people. So we are consistent, and we are having a lens on diversity and inclusion and all of the other words that come with this now, right? And, you know, but it's supporting all of our goals. And so if we know where we're going, it's so much easier to build that foundation that Ashley was talking about too earlier, where it's like, what do we want? What does good look like? Are we setting goals? You know, and this is foundational to us. Like when we're like, oh yeah, do SMART goals. This is part of HR. We do this all the time, but then we never practice what we preach. So I think it's so important to just kind of like, let's start at the basics. Let's align on what we want, and then we can build these programs. And then you have a seat at the table, right? Because they want to hear what you have to say, but they want it to be what they want. And if you know what they want, then check the box. Like, I'm giving you exactly what you just asked for, right? And or you could call them out on it, which sometimes we need to do too. So I will pass it over to one of my friends here.
Yeah, I can share. I'll plus one to everything you said. One thing I learned very early on in my career when approaching management or executives is with them. So what's in it for them? And whenever I pitch, or whenever I think about, okay, this data is telling a story that I need to relate to our executive team because it impacts their business, I also need to think about, how am I going to present this in a way that's going to help them meet their goals as well? So from a DEI perspective, if it's a representation issue, then I need to tell the leader, like, hey, there's a representation issue. Here's how it's going to affect the product, or here's how it's going to affect our customers, or here's how it's going to affect your culture. And then the repercussions of that could be X. But also presenting a solution too. Sometimes executives don't really know what to do with the data that you're giving them. They may be leaned into it, but in order to action on it, you also have to come with a solution and maybe collaborate with them as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. The way that I like to think about it is that I want to link up like more than I think I have to, right? So like really making the implicit that I know and I believe explicit for other people, even if it seems so obvious, I have to make it explicit. So like if I notice that 11% of our team said that they experienced a microaggression in the last 3 months, I know why that matters, but do my senior leadership know why that matters? Like it doesn't just matter because it increases risk of retention or increases risk of attrition, right? It matters because of our company culture. It matters because our XYZ goals, our mission. It matters because of the cost of turnover, right? All of these things, I have to link all the way up to what those high level metrics are that matters to the executives, even if those aren't the things that matter most to me. Like I still have to make that connection for them.
It's true. Thank you so much for that really helpful insight. So while you're linking up and you're trying to check that box for those executives, you guys are obviously working with teams, right? Like it's not just you amazing powerhouses collecting all of this data, but I'd like to know from our attendees, how often are you meeting with your teams internally to review your data and create a presentation and make sure that you guys are on track, not only with the goals you set with your executives, but any other goals that your team might have?
I'm going to set the trend here and keep on going first. So I think, oh, is that it's just a poll question that just popped up?
It was just a poll, but I'd love to hear your thoughts, Carly.
I'm just popping up.
I'm really digging your experience.
My computer has multiple screens, so I didn't even see it pop up. Yeah, you know, I mean, I think that this is so interesting to me. I think that HR data analytics has come such a long way in a very short period of time, where it used to be kind of like I'm just checking in to make sure we're checking the box here. And now it is way more of a fruitful exercise, where if you're intentional, and it's only if you're intentional and it's not just for an exercise, that you can really check in on like what I would consider a scorecard. So are we really hitting the diversity needs of hires? Are we really hitting our needs for like compensation in like adverse impact planning, that kind of thing, and making really meaningful things so you could actually make a statement publicly to check in. So I'm looking at the poll results here, like per quarter. You know, I think that for small teams, this is a really difficult thing to make and keep up with, to be fair. If you have like a big team with somebody dedicated to HR analytics, I think it's a little bit easier. But I do think that you get a lot out of it and you're able to tell better stories to your executive team and get better, you know, I guess adoption rates from them.
Agreed. It looks like we have some about the same amount of people across the board kind of meeting at different intervals. So you mentioned, you know, you don't want to just have the meeting to check a box and have the meeting. How do you set up an agenda that is successful, that makes sure that you are pulling a cadence that's going to be enough time for you guys to have data, make actionable things, and it's not too long in between there? Like, do you have a standing event? Do you wait until like an event is triggered to schedule those meetings? How do you guys do that internally? Ashley or Ivory, I'd love to hear too, your thoughts there.
Yeah. So I'll just share briefly. We do it in a few different ways. One is looking at annual trends and setting our goals for the entire year of what our themes are going to be and what are the most important metrics to make movement on. That gives us time to actually make movement on them because we're taking a year to dedicate to it. But we also look quarterly to understand, as we're doing our strategic planning for that quarter, what's most important to make progress on. And so we do both. As we're doing that process, there are smaller check-ins, of course, on the progress that we're making toward those metrics. But in terms of deciding what's most important and setting that, it's both annually and quarterly.
Yeah, I would say pretty much the same. One thing that I really appreciate about the CEO here at ChartHop is I actually have a standing monthly with him. And during those monthly check-ins, we go through DEI data. But I also meet with the leadership team on a quarterly basis to go through their specific DEI data in relation to their departments. So based on those conversations, we create a quarterly action plan that they action on every quarter. And that's what we focus on. So if it's focused on increasing employee engagement, or if it's thinking about maybe our team needs bias training, or maybe we need to increase representation of this training, we have a quarter to try to make progress, and then we can begin to shift there. I think a monthly check-in with our executive team is probably too short of a runway to actually see progress, but quarterly allows us to do that. And then on an annual basis, we also look at annually, how did we do? What do we need to focus on an annual basis from a DEI perspective as an entire company?
There's just something there that I want to call out that Ivory said too, was creating action plans. There's nothing more important than employees actually seeing that they've been asked, but then being acted on is the most important thing. Because I think so many engagement surveys go without follow-up, and then people you lose your credibility right away. So I think that's something worthwhile calling out, because that's what people want to see, is exactly what you just said.
Especially when they take like 40 minutes to fill out, right? Yeah.
It's true. Have you ever taken a survey and been frustrated that there's literally nothing that comes out of it? Like, even if you got a gift card out of it, I want to see results. I don't really want a $5 Amazon gift card. Everything I buy on Amazon is like more than $5.
Look, I've been on teams, quite frankly, and it's not where I am right now, but I've been on teams in the past where like they did engagement surveys and I was part of that HR function. And then I would never see something come out of that. And I was like, you guys, you just lost everything. Like you just lost it all. Like we need to come out and say something.
Yes.
And so it's so important, if you're going to ask for it, that you do something actionable. It could be anything.
And not to derail us, I do actually, Lisa, your comment about rebuilding trust is difficult. It's correct. So being cognizant of everything that you guys are doing, you wear a lot of hats. But adding on to that is making sure that you follow through, because that rebuild is more effort than is to just be proactive and follow through in the first place. So we have one last question for our webinar panelists. This actually is going to draw on the way that your roles have changed over time. So I'm wondering, do you guys have insight into how your hiring metrics, the employee lifecycle value, how has that changed not only in the last period of time with the pandemic, but even in the last decade or so as HR has really come to the forefront? What have you guys seen in your careers and your insights from that?
I'll start. I'll share one or two things that I've noticed. One that I'm like super grateful for is that we aren't just measuring diversity as DEI anymore. We're actually thinking about the other letters. One of my biggest pet peeves is when people say DEI data and they just mean diversity data. Let's be real with what we're talking about. If what we're looking at diversity is what we're looking at with diversity is demographics, that's not DEI, that's diversity. We also need to be finding metrics for inclusion, finding metrics for equity, whatever else you're saying the work is about. Let's be intentional with how we measure it. I get super excited about that because then it gives me more work to do, which like sounds silly, but I love being able to actually make progress and do things that are going to help my team. If all I know about is the demographic makeup of our team, that's hard. It's hard progress to make, and it's only one place for this work to exist. The other thing that I've noticed, companies have been asking people to give a lot of themselves to the company, right? We ask people to show up as their full selves. We ask people to contribute to the culture, which is good in a lot of ways, but that also means that we have to measure the impact of that, because it could be positive and it could also be detracting. And I've seen more companies lately start to put more intention into measuring if that is a good practice or not.
Yeah, I'll plus one there. I think I have seen that same shift from diversity, equity, inclusion, meaning demographic data, looking at race and gender specifically, to it shifting to look up to think about race, gender, veteran status, disability status, and so many other demographic indicators as well, to now also thinking about how do we look at inclusion, equity, belonging, how do you measure those things, but also how do you couple that with looking at your engagement surveys by demographic data and trying to figure out like what is the whole story, what are our employees feeling and thinking based on their backgrounds, and trying to create a inclusive and workplace that is actually makes employees feel like they do belong. So I'm starting to see that shift as well. So yeah, I think there's a lot more that we can do. And I think we're going to continue to see shifts over time as we begin to be smarter about what actually DEI actually means. And then also how we think about this, this is new word, belonging, right? Like, what does that mean? How do we measure belonging? But also how do we think about how do we also think about not only the talent that we're bringing in, but also how do we think about the talent that already exists within our organizations? I think especially when we've thought about DEIB or DEI, we've always thought about it from like a attraction, hiring standpoint. We never really thought about it from a retention, growth perspective. And I think we're also starting to see that shift, especially around pay equity, growth opportunities, and so forth. So I'm excited to see how this continues to shift over time.
Can
Great.
I add
Yep.
one thing there real quickly? I just want to touch on this idea that you mentioned, Ivory, of like, cross-analyzing data with demographic data. What this allows us to do is instead of just designing for the majority, we can actually design for those who are most impacted. That's a huge shift. And that's so exciting for this work to not just look at like, oh, 60% of people said they're happy, great, but actually look at what the differences are between the people who are and aren't. I think that's a huge shift in how we've been able to analyze our people data. Sorry, Carly, I got really excited. And
Oh, no, I love it.
You.
I love the passion. I could talk about this literally for the rest of the day. And also, Ivory, I think you mentioned something about like defining what belonging means. So as soon as you figure that one out, please call me because I'm be happy to talk about it. So what I've seen, and again, like kind of in my past life, probably more focused on compensation, but what we saw in the last few years was because everybody was resigning, everybody came to comp and said, you're not paying anybody enough money. And I said, well, let's just like flip this just for a second. We can handle comp and we'll follow up as fast as the market will give us data. We can do that, right? But let's talk about our employee value proposition. What really is it? Do we really believe in this DEIB stuff or do we not? Do we really believe that we have a mission and culture here that we can keep sustainable, that's going to make people happy? Do we have good management teams? Do we have things people pulling in? And really getting our arms wrapped around what does that mean? Because if they're only there for comp, there's always going to be somewhere that they could leave to. And that's for any of us, right? Like it doesn't matter if you are like the top paying company right now, there's always going to be one other person that's going to say yes to something that's incredible. So I think that's like one of the latest trends that I've seen where it's like hyper focused on let's just blame this one function, where like we really need to do some inward looking, and not to make it like super personal and psychological, but like we really need to find out who we are and what we want from ourselves and our culture there. Otherwise you're just never going to get that type of engagement that you want, and that's from the beginning to the end. So recruit, engage, and retain from the beginning to the end of the life cycle. And I don't think you could do it any other way. So if the only thing you could get from your executives is buy-in on what they think that their proposition is, then that's a good start.
I love the passion. Thank you guys so much. I also could talk about this all day, so I might have to ping Kuvalay to see if we can do this again. But with that being said, I'm going to actually segue us to Ashley, who's going to give us a workshop so that you guys can start practicing on how to build your action plans and really get some practice with collecting objective data and how do you start digging into these more systemic themes that we've been talking about. So without further ado, I'm going to hand the reins over.
Thanks, Melissa. And I'm going to do this super quickly. I'm going to make the most of our time. I'm just going to give you like a little bit of an insight into what is a larger workshop. And I'm going to pick probably my two favorite tools to share out of what is a bit of a larger concept. So let me just go ahead and share my screen to start. Are you all able to see this okay? Just give me okay. I see Carly's thumbs up, so I'm going to take that as a yes from everyone. Thank you. So I mentioned that I love this topic. I truly think it's one of the most important skill sets that we can teach our leaders. And it's one of the most important skill sets to actually be able to have influence in your own work. I think about it because I get to work with companies all across the world and figure out what works and doesn't work for them. So for those who don't know, LifeLabs is a leadership training company. We help people optimize and maximize the skill sets that make work for them. We most often work with executives and managers, but we work with whole teams. And in my work, why this is cool is that I get data from hundreds of companies and I get to really understand what's happening. So let me just start. We've been talking a lot about strategy, thinking strategically. I think about it as two small things, right? The first is considering the future with your current decisions and actions. And the second is thinking about the complexities of any situation. When we ask senior executives, like, what's the most important skill set for your managers, for your leaders to have? They say strategic thinking, but very few actually know what that means. Like, they can't define it. They just think it sounds like a good idea, right? And so what I want to do is dissect it down a little bit and think about what it is and why it matters so much. You all know this. We've been talking about this. If you are not able to think strategically, you end up making mistakes, your work end up not mattering, or someone shuts it down. You can have a greater impact when you're able to do this. And realistically, it helps us all stand out if we're able to get other people on board with our plans, to show the future with them, to be strategic with it. So let me show you which habits matter most. The cool thing about this is that if we break it down into smaller habits and behaviors, then anyone can act on it, rather than it being this like big picture concept. So there's 5 habits. I'm just gonna sneak peek 2 of them for you. This is a larger workshop that we offer, so I'm gonna give you a little bit of insight. I'm gonna pick the first 2, partially because they're really 2 of my favorites, so 2 that I use almost every day in my work, but also it's just a great place to start. So let me begin here with the gap check. I love doing a gap check because it helps you begin with the end in mind, or basically plan ahead. Right? Y'all know what happens when we don't plan ahead. We end up doing things without thinking about what the end result is. And so with the gap check, it's my favorite tool because it helps us understand what's the gap between where we're at and where we're trying to get to. Far too often, all we do is think about that desired state of what we're trying to get to, without pausing to ask, what is our current state and where are we currently at? It matters so much to also think about where we're currently at, so we know how big that gap is. And it makes it measurable, which has lots of different benefits to it, right? So let's say that we know we want like our overall engagement score to be 85%. Great. If we, though, are able to also show that our current is 65%, let's say next year we get it up to 70. We didn't get our goal, but we can still at least show that we made progress and figure out why we didn't reach our goal. And so by doing a gap check, it helps us inform how big or small the strategy should be. It boosts our motivation when we're actually taking action because we feel that progress of getting things done and we can track it. And it stops that low value work, because what if you realize that your current state is maybe your current state's an 82? Yes, getting to an 85 might be valuable, but is that actually the right goal that you want to be spending your time and resources on if it's only a 3-point spread? I don't know. This one has been really helpful for me. I mentioned earlier this idea of tracking how many people are experiencing microaggressions at work. This has been really important for me to do a gap check with. Like, obviously my goal is 0. I want 0 people to experience microaggressions at work. But am I ever going to achieve that goal? Maybe, but it's going to be really hard. And so I have to know where I'm currently at as well, so I can actually feel the progress and understand what's working and not working. Otherwise, I think especially in people-facing work, if we're always just striving for that perfect ideal state, it's going to feel defeating so often because it's going to be so hard to get there, right? And so by recognizing where we're currently at, assessing that gap, then we can feel that progress as we go. So that's the first, is that gap check of knowing both the future state and the current state, and then making progress in between. I'm going to just zoom right forward into the lens check as well. I'm going to use the same example for this just to kind of highlight how each of these tools can be used together. I love the lens check because it forces me to kind of zoom out for myself rather than maybe being a little bit judgy, which, like, you know, I'm not perfect. I have that reaction too sometimes. So with a lens check, it allows us to understand the different lenses that might be impacting a situation. So let's try out this hypothetical first. Let's imagine you created a new role on the people team. Your goal is that someone stays in that role for at least 2 years. But the reality is that 3 people have either quit or failed at that role. I think a lot of us have been here before. And it's easy for that first reaction to be that there's something wrong with the people we're hiring, that they either don't have the skills to complete that job, or maybe they don't have the will, the motivation to get it done. This person lens, this is often our go-to, right? This is our fundamental attribution error, where we take something that someone does and make it be about who they are as a person, right? So if someone didn't succeed in that job, I don't know, they're just lazy. Like they can't do it. And it's so easy to think that, even though logically we know that that's probably not all that's going on. And so maybe this is a lens. Maybe it is a skill or a will issue. But we can also zoom out and think about how the manager, maybe it's the hiring manager or the management of the team, how they might be contributing. I think there's a lot of different ways, right? But maybe they don't have clear success metrics. Maybe the job description was actually really blurry. Maybe they're not providing good feedback or setting good boundaries or being a good role model, right? There's a lot that could be happening here in this manager lens as well. And let's be real, there's probably even some bigger picture things that could be contributing on this company level. I don't know, like maybe one that's come up over the last 2 years is maybe used to be an in-person co-located role, and now it's not anymore. And maybe that has an impact on people's working relationships, right? Or maybe there's values that are going for or against what's happening. Maybe there's not role models, there's systems, constraints. All of these different lenses can be impacting this situation. But if we're only thinking about one, we're not going to be able to solve it. We're just going to keep wondering why we keep hiring the wrong people and keep hiring the wrong people, right? But it's not about the person. So let me just share a couple of examples here about this. One way that I like to think about it is that that's within the person, between the people, and then in the environment. This ability to look at it through different lenses is called multivariate thinking. I'm actually going to come off screen share for a moment just so I can share 2 stories about this lens check. I'm going to share one really simple one that I bet a lot of people can relate to. I have an ex who never did the dishes. For what it's worth, her name is Ashley also, so that was awkward in itself, but it's fine. Ashley never did the dishes. Easy for me to think it's a skill or will issue, right? She's lazy, she doesn't care about me. I see some smiles and nods, you've been there, cool. Also, I'm probably contributing, right? When she leaves the dishes in the sink, I do them myself. Passive aggressively, but I do them myself, right? So I'm not helping, I'm not giving direct feedback, and I'm just handling the situation. And then on an environment level, why do we only have 2 sets of plates? It doesn't have to be that big of a problem, but it's always a problem because we only have 2 sets of plates. Okay, I can't do anything about her laziness. And, end of the day, we broke up, so. But what I can do is give clear feedback. What I can do is buy more plates. And so by using the 3 lens model, we can actually understand where we can have an impact. If I think about that example of microaggressions, let's say 11% of my team experienced microaggressions in the last 6 months. The people committing them, I don't know that it's a skill issue, but it might be will, it might be learning, it might be knowledge. Interpersonally, are there good role models? Are we intervening when we notice microaggressions? Do people know how to do that? On a company level, how are we responding as a company when we notice microaggressions? Is there a good process for people to actually report them anonymously if they don't feel comfortable giving that feedback directly? All of these things are going to impact this one piece of data. And if I don't have the different lenses of information, I don't have that full story of what's actually going on. Right? So I'm just going to pause here. These are truly my 2 favorite tools that I use when it comes to understanding data and thinking strategically. That gap check of understanding where we're at now and where we're trying to get to, and the lens check of understanding what different lenses might be impacting the situation. I'm going to pause here for time because I'm curious. This isn't my role, but Melissa, I might be overstepping for a second, but I'm actually really curious, like for you all, for Carly, Ivory, even you, Melissa, have you used tools like this, and how have they helped you be more influential or better understand your data?
I could respond to at least the gap piece. I think the gap analysis is like a natural part of comp and benefits because you're going to use utilization reports or like hard, fast data. You're going to figure out like where you are maybe versus the market, or where you are, where your people are actually utilizing benefits versus where they're not. You're going to figure out what that gap and cost is and try to fix that. And you could easily, like more easily, create a project like management plan, strategic plan to close that gap and to prioritize, because it's a little bit easier data to digest. The data that you're talking about is a little bit more difficult because it's a little more emotional, it's a little bit more leadership. And so like, I think that is the more difficult thing, where you need to dive into that lens. By the way, I love that tool, because I think it's very difficult to articulate that. Like usually we use words like be objective. Is it really that? Have you really thought about some of the other things it is? But like, so we use it, but probably not that well. And I think if you could bring people there and articulate the statement, you could actually get them to kind of pull themselves away from their emotions and push themselves into the way of being super objective, which is lovely. So I will take that as a takeaway.
Thanks, Carly.
I also actually will say, so as a customer success manager, I just help all of our people partners really accomplish their objectives. But we rely very heavily on using this lens, looking at not only like, how do you guys understand our product? Is it that we don't have enough documentation? Is it that things aren't clear? Is it that I wasn't clear? So as a person, as a presenter, as a teacher, and as a partner for all of our people partners, being able to look at those multiple lenses and say, like, was it something that I did? Was it something that we need to work on? Like, where is it falling apart? And it really just helps build those strategic relationships and partnerships that continue to drive success. I mean, it is all just about working with people, really. So I love that tool.
Honestly, I think I'm going to steal all these tools. I'm definitely, you're dropping some gems, and I'm definitely learning as well. I think like from my experience, you know, I've done like gap analysis and things like that, but a lot of what I do now is more like anecdotal data, understanding like what our people are feeling, trying to problem solve from there. And I think taking some of these tools, putting them into practice could actually help us address some of these core issues just in DEI a little bit better. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree. I think so much of our work in people-facing roles is about people's feelings and people's experiences. And if we don't have the data for that, y'all know what happens when you try to take those anecdotes to leadership, right? It's like, what's the data? And so that means we have to pivot and really understand that, like, how can I turn this into data? How can I tell this story in another way? I totally agree. Thank you. I'll pause there and pass it back over to you, Melissa. Thank you for allowing me to share some of those tools with y'all.
Yeah, I love it. And I think actually all of our attendees also loved it. We heard a lot of shout outs for how wonderful these tools are and how they'll be adopting them. So thank you so much, Ashley, for sharing that with us. And at this point, everyone, we are going to start to wrap things up. Does anyone have any closing remarks, leaving our attendees with some insightful positivity as they start their journeys or continue their journeys into collecting more data to help their companies thrive?
I mean, I think the only thing that I would throw out there is like, try not to overwhelm yourself, try to keep it simple, build out your roadmap or your plan to success. And then just like Ashley was saying, like, you know, you want to kind of start with the end in mind, but keep it easy and then just act on it, you know, relentlessly.
That's great advice. I myself have to remind myself not to get overwhelmed and do all of my projects at once.
I will just add on to that. One thing that's been so helpful for me is treating everything like an experiment. So I'll say, I'm going to experiment with setting this goal. I'm going to experiment with this intervention. And then it puts less pressure on me, because if it doesn't work, I'll try something else next time. And just that small change in like reframing has truly made me less scared of data. And so think about like, what if you're kind of holding yourself back from truly understanding the data and the story? Try to create a shift for yourself to see how it can be helpful and exciting rather than scary.
I like that. Thank you, Ashley. Reframing is incredibly important, and it seems like your background in social work has really lended itself to your strengths here. So I appreciate it very much. Ivory, did you have any final words? Not to put you on the spot, you can say no.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I will just say, like, I know data, the word data, thinking about like analyzing and things like that, it's very scary. I will say like, I come from a background where I didn't utilize much data and I knew that I had to for my work. So maybe go into it with saying like, okay, I'm here ready to learn. I'm here just trying to figure out like what is actually happening. And if you don't know, YouTube it. That's what I did. I actually YouTubed. I YouTubed how to do VLOOKUPs and so much other things. So that way I could learn. So that way I could get to understand like what the moral of the story is and what's actually happening. So that, because at the end of the day, we all want to know what's going on. And in order to do that, we have to manipulate the data. And it's not as hard as we think it is. I think it's probably mind over matter. But if all else fails, definitely use YouTube. And then I'll say one last thing. When you're going into the data, maybe try to think about putting your preconceived notions or what you think the data is going to tell you to the side. Let the data tell the story. Because sometimes we think we know the answer, but then the data tells us something completely different. So I think that'll be a fun discovery.
Excellent. Well, it looks like we're just about time now. So thank you all so much for sharing your time. I know I speak for all of our attendees when I say we learned a lot and we're really excited and your passion is contagious. So thank you all so much. And thank you everyone for joining our webinar today. It will be recorded and sent to you with a survey. So we'd love your truthfully and honest feedback on the survey, please. And we hope we will be able to engage with you later. Have a great day.
Are you saying we want the data from them, Melissa?
Yes, we want the data. Thank you all.